Thanks everyone, and I see some familiar faces here from yesterday and some new ones as well. Look forward to a quick, I think we've got only about 20 minutes to cover these very important topics. So if I go a little bit fast over some concepts and pieces of this, please forgive me. Happy to chat offline or double click into anything that you would like me to. Feel free to just stop me. So, as a starting point, just a disclaimer, this is not me, it's Deloitte. Also, a mandatory piece of propaganda. So the reason I'm here talking to you about it is because at Deloitte we've invested heavily into AI and machine learning related thought leadership. We have this thing called Deloitte AI Institute that kind of drives a lot of the content development in the space, and we do surveys, we do publications, and so on. In fact, a lot of things that we talk about today have been published in the Wall Street Journal and other places, so there's more where this came from. But as an opening act, I think just talking about risks in the AI world, there are many different ways to organize it. I think I'm sure that every one of your institutions probably has something similar, some sort of framework where you kind of try to pull together all the different risks of AI. And at Deloitte, we kind of think of these like 6 components, starting with the fairness, impartiality. So are the models biased or not? Model bias obviously is a huge topic. Then moving on into transparency and explainability, which we'll talk about a lot today. Then responsibility and accountability, making sure that that there is a human who ultimately ownership of the models and the applications, somebody who has the ability to direct the model, change the model's behavior, throw a kill switch if necessary if the model is not doing what it's supposed to do. There is a set of risks around we call it robustness and reliability, and that covers both the traditional sort of NRM types of activities, of does the black box ultimately do what it's supposed to do, but it takes on an extra dimension as it relates to AI and ML models, because robustness and reliability doesn't just talk about does the model do what it's supposed to do under normal conditions. It also talks about could the model be tricked into doing something wrong if you give it the wrong inputs, either accidentally or if it is maliciously being provoked, as we've seen from the newspapers. Some of the chatbots have been provoked into doing silly things. Is it reliable and robust with respect to the input data that's getting and the applications that it's being used for? Privacy is an important concern that we kind of put into the framework of trustworthy AI as well, because a lot of these models are notoriously data hungry, and they go and they find every piece of data they can incorporate, and making sure that we have the rights to use the data, that we have consent of the data owners, and an ability to use it in a safe manner that doesn't violate privacy is an important element to it. And then finally, what we call safety and security that combines with them the more traditional types of cyber risks that would relate to all models and applications, but again takes on an extra meaning in the context of AI ML because of the client-facing nature of a lot of these applications, and also because of the ongoing learning that a lot of these applications are engaged in. And so it's harder to protect those types of activities and those types of applications from a cyber and safety and security perspective, because they are learning in real time, because they're interacting with the real world. You can't just hide them behind firewalls. So that's the general framework and how we think of the totality of AI risks. And as you can see, it kind of goes beyond what a typical sort of maybe traditional model risk activities would involve. And so in terms of kind of where the industry is, and this is a little bit specific to banking. How many of you are from banking here? Banks? So investment management, other financial services, insurance companies, maybe in different stages. But I would say that on this spectrum, you have, banks that kind of have just started thinking about it. You have those that have laid out a framework, which is where I think most institutions are. They have some sort of a new framework around capturing AI risks, but maybe not fully implemented it. And then those that have, are ahead of everybody and both have the framework, have implemented it, and are living the dream right now. And I would say that the industry as a whole is somewhere in this space where the frameworks exist, maybe not fully developed, not fully complete, and certainly not fully implemented. So they haven't gone and caught every model that's an AI model in the institution and put it, subjected it to the full governance process. So another interesting tidbit here, which again just counts as a little bit of a snapshot of where the industry is and how MRM comes into picture. And so the one question sometimes gets raised, does MRM play a role? Of course, at banks, MRM is central. For those of you who are, coming from institutions that are outside of banks, either financial services, fintechs, and whatnot, you would say, what is MRM? So model risk management. Most banks have a department that is tasked with overseeing model risk. Have been doing this all along before it was cool. Have been doing this before AI and ML came around. So because AI models are also models, MRM does what they're supposed to do. And Andres spoke yesterday about how much work goes into taking MRM framework and kind of upgrading and updating it to make sure that it captures AI risks. And so one of the very easy questions to answer is, do you have an AI inventory? And obviously most would say yes, we have it, it's part of our model inventory. But again, another trivial question. A lot of times we go to institutions, either in banking or outside, and they don't have a list. They say, we think we know of the major ones, but we think we also know we don't know of many that exist out there. They think that every time we go to a business and we start talking to them, we discover new things. A good example recently where an MRM team went downstairs to the IT department and started talking to them about what they use, what tools they use, what applications, what vendors they use. They came out of finding like 20 different models that technology folks were using to manage cybersecurity, cyber risk. A lot of those tools, a lot of those vendors are heavy users of AI and ML. So you don't really think of technology or IT or cyber risk areas as model owners, but they are. And so, institutions continue to find areas where AI is and is just coming out of the woodwork, if you would, and maybe not fully subject to tracking. Are validation procedures performed? Yes. For the most part, there are some nuances there that I don't have time to go into right now, but happy to double click later on if you like. Do you have a broader governance policy? This is an interesting one because some institutions say yes, we do, and some institutions say no, we just kind of govern it as part of our MRM mandate. Sometimes AI risk and AI governance goes beyond MRM. An interesting question. Is there ever a situation where AI is not considered a model? In most cases, what we're finding is that if something has AI, it is a model based on the definitions. But sometimes folks kind of separate out AI models from AI non-models. But then the next question is, well, what do you do with the non-models? And the answer is usually that we have to do something with them anyway. So it may be a semantic issue in some cases, but it is an interesting nuance and something that regulators are highly attuned to as well. So, we touched on explainability as one of the key dimensions of this risk, and that's because for us as an organization to have governance around AI objects, ultimately, beyond keeping track of them, right? Like once we have an inventory, once we've counted them, we have line items in some spreadsheet that say, okay, here are my black boxes. You really need to know fundamentally what that black box does. And so explainability becomes a necessary, not sufficient, but a necessary condition for a lot of other activities that an organization can have around managing and governing risk around AI. And so, we see organizations putting in controls, putting in tools to enable their researchers to bring explainability into the modeling process from the start, making sure that whatever they produce at the end meets standards of explainability and transparency without having to do it after the fact. It's always harder, and it's always much more expensive to do it after the fact, and it's also much more risky to do it after the fact because you may not like the explanation. An interesting graph that I'm happy to attribute to wherever we took it from. It's not my creation, but it is a beautiful chart, I think, because it talks about how there's a scale of different model types, modeling techniques, and there's a trade-off between model interpretability and model accuracy. And sometimes when we're trying to increase accuracy, which is what all the modelers always strive for, right? So the modeler, if left to their own devices, will be climbing up this curve and use more and more complex models. The trade-off a lot of times is interpretability. It's harder and harder to really understand how the black box does what it does. And that trade-off is very palpable at an institution that also tries to impose controls, or an institution that's highly regulated, or an institution that tries to gather its risks. And so that desire by the quants, and I can use the word because I'm a recovering quant myself. So, the desire by the quants to build more and more complex models when left on their own has to be checked by the institution, basically telling them, listen, that's fine. It's okay for you to use more complex models. First of all, tell us why. And we talked the other day that sometimes institutions actually force developers to kind of justify why they need a more complex model. And then if you do, then how do you make sure that the explainability, interpretability remains there? This is a 20-minute talk, so I'm not going to be able to double click into each one of these items, but there are definitely multiple techniques around explainability, kind of intrinsically interpretable methods, as I would call them, through linear regressions and logistic regressions and decision trees, and then interpretability methods that kind of try to explainability methods that try to come in from a model agnostic perspective and look at the model from the outside and either try to create a surrogate model to explain it either global or local, or tries to kind of explain the outputs using the view of the inputs, kind of looking outside of the black box. Really interesting topic. Multiple white papers written about it. Multiple tools have been developed. A number of vendors out there. I don't actually see as many of them here at this conference, but they do exist. That space of explaining models and interpreting models, and of course, a number of institutions build their own tools into the model lifecycle process to implement some of these techniques, and putting in gates to make sure that by the time the model is implemented, that the model is understandable, is interpretable, and can be understood. Right. So again, a little bit of a bank view here, but those of you who are not from banks may still find this useful. There are certainly things that both the first, second, third lines of defense can do around explainability, and one of the big challenges in the industry is that a lot of times explainability is an afterthought, right? So first we have quants and modelers and data scientists trying to produce the best model they can, and then a lot of times they don't come around to kind of explaining it and building in explainability until after the fact. And that is a major challenge, especially for something that's already running, that's already functioning out there. It increases risks, the costs are very high, and just even doing it after the fact from a logistical MLOps perspective creates really challenging kind of interdependencies. And so we advocate building explainability into the process from the start as you're building out your MLOps. Have some interesting ideas in that as well. Happy to chat on that. But second line, we talked a little bit about MRM and its role, and kind of being the independent view on whether the model is sufficiently transparent and sufficiently explainable, and making sure that the gates are there, that you have to be this tall for this ride, and you have to be this explainable to be operated within an institution. So that's the role of second line, and we do see MRM typically playing that at major banks, but outside of banking, this is a little bit of a white space right now, right? So you go to investment managers, you go to insurance companies, you go outside of financial services. This is a little bit of a wild west and doesn't always happen in a consistent fashion. And finally, interestingly enough, we're also seeing internal audit and third line of defense kind of coming in and trying to play a role in there as well, and making sure that the first and second line do what they're supposed to do as they normally would, and really getting up to speed on this explainability concepts, because for them it's also a way to really understand what's going on with the modeling. Up until that point, you have quants talking to quants, and sometimes they can understand each other without too much additional explainability to do there. So sometimes kind of folks from the third line of defense who bring a little bit of a broader controls perspective come in and ground everybody and say, okay, guys, unless we understand it, it is not explained, it's not explainable. So help us kind of bring it to the common denominator. So there are different kind of stakeholders involved in the process. There are model developers and data scientists and risk managers and others involved, and we believe that there's a kind of a lens for each of them in terms of what they are looking for from an explainability perspective, and different techniques that allow for the explainability. So we talked a lot about the modeler and the quant kind of dimension of it and kind of perspective, but there's even the customer perspective. Like if you're giving a customer some sort of black box tool that will forecast something for them, or will give them a prediction or a recommendation, there are ways to build explainability to that process by giving like reason codes or like impact variables and things that kind of move the needle the most, and even that will help them understand what the black box does without being quants, without being behind the tent or in the tent, if you would, from a bank perspective. And so at each step in the process, and we're running out of time here, there are steps that organizations can do to build explainability into the process and give the specific sets of users and stakeholders the ability to kind of look inside the black box and understand what it does. And with that, let me stop here and see if we have time maybe for one question before we break until the next.
Yeah, I have a little bit of time.
Any questions? Yes.
You used the word actionable resource and highlighted feature as explanations and customers. And features are actionable
I personally am always wary of putting a nuclear missile in the hands of a nape or whatever they call it. Right? So like there are dangers in what's the other expression they use? Citizen data science, right? Where we kind of try to give folks more tools than they can really use. use. No, that was not the implication. I think each stakeholder should do what they should do, and we should try to leave the modeling to the modelers, and the outputs and interpretation of those results to the users, and try not to commingle the two. In fact, the gray area of AutoML and low code, no code, or as I now call it, low model, no model, right? Where there's a data set and some outputs come out by magic, and there's no model almost in between because it's all done on the fly through some sort of an AutoML solution. To me, those are kind of very dangerous gray areas for the banks or other institutions, because sometimes it's not unclear what is there for the bank to track, or something is happening, AI ML is being used, but there isn't a lot of meat to try to catch. It's almost like an equivalent of a EUC, or people just building their own spreadsheets, except they're running really sophisticated modeling stuff. And so that creates its own set of risks for banks, more for tracking purposes, but then the minute you track it, it becomes an interpretability and explainability issue as well. All right, well, thank you everyone for your time. I know we have a break now, and have a great day.